Greetings, citizens from the rolling hills of the bluegrass. I've recently come across some things that are just very confusing to me. This goes back to the Ammon Bundy video. But you have people that are of the liberty mind, of the libertarian mind. And I'm trying to understand exactly where their logic is coming from. You had Mike Malice the other day that I watched, him and Thaddeus Russell, for those who know those two names. And I really like Mike Malice. He's a bit of a troll. He kind of, and that's something he calls himself. So that's not like a slam on him. He calls himself a troll, and I think it's kind of fun. You vicariously live through his mischievousness. He's a Loki, is what he is, not the Marvel version that we get in the movies, but the real kind of, without the malevolence, but the real Norse god Loki, the trickster god. And it's come up several times now that these riots are not as bad as people think they are. And I don't know if that's just because of distance, if that's an unwillingness to give ground to potentially political suppression. But it's not just him. You know, you have Bundy, you have Malice having that discussion with Thaddeus Russell, talking about how, oh, well, not so many people have died as, compared to other issues or during other riots. And then you also have the Free Talk Live guys. And they're also coming from that same position. And I just don't get it. Why they don't see. And I would like to know why. Why they just don't see who these groups are that are doing this. Before this 2016 election, these were the same people, and right after, they were chanting "Recreate 68." Recreate 1968, 67, 68 through 72. You're talking about one of the most unsettling political set of years in American history, domestically. And they're using those same slogans from that time period. You have a resurgence of the Black Power movement. And it's like, why would you say that this is less? They've actually advanced further than they did in 68. They just had the riots in 68, and there was a handful of small changes on local levels, but not at the federal level. But now you have the federal coming under the sway of these people. And during that debate, or that discussion between Russell and Malice, Russell, of all people, who I never would think they go, yeah, absolutely, he raises the point that this is very different. So you have the libertarian-minded fellow, and they both are to a degree, but I think Russell is a little more, he's a little too academic at times. And here's Russell, who openly states that he fears what's going on. And Malice is just kind of oblivious to it. It feels. And you're going, how do you square this? How do you get where you are? And that's why I want to know. I'm not mad at him. I'm not angry at him. I just don't understand, especially someone like Malice, who can quote history to you about dealing with these kinds of people. These are the same people that ran his family out. These are the same kinds of communists. They're using the same types of rhetoric. It may be with an American splash. But in the end, it's coming from the same idea. And to have Malice talk about how it's not that dangerous, or the Free Talk Live people talk about how it's not dangerous, especially when they support property rights. And that's the next step, right? That is the next step. I always said liberals, if they could, and this was liberals when it was used more generally, not so much now when you need to be very specific and say leftists. If the liberals could do what they wanted, right, they would take every subdivision and they would go, house number 1 will be a white family, house number 2 will be a black family, house number 3 will be and they would do this, and they would do it every single thing, and they would take those houses from those people, give them to other people, so that you could have this rainbow, this color diverse community, forcibly. Now, you should live with other people so that you can learn who things are, but you need to do it as your choice. But if they had the option, they would go community by community, and they would just change the demographics altogether. Which, it could be fine if it was a choice. But it's not going to be a choice. They will make you. And those are the people that are going to be coming into political power as the next decades roll on. They're people just a few years younger than me, right? Technically, I'm a millennial, but I'm in that weird 2 and 3 year gap where I have just enough knowledge. Most of my teachers were born in, quite honestly, the 30s and the 40s. When I was in elementary school, middle school, right? And then most of my high school teachers would have been born, somewhere in the 60s. We're at this point where now students are being taught by people who were born in the 90s. And those politics, that politics right there is exactly when it started to change, in the 90s, the late 80s, early 90s. Those are the teachers who are now going to be teaching these students. And that's exactly the reason why these authoritarians want control of the schools. They want your kids in these schools so that they can teach your children what they need to believe. And that's exactly where it is. These are the politicians that are going to be coming up. And yes, we have a generation after mine, or 2 generations after mine, that are potentially going to be very conservative in reaction to the lefties that have come from my generation. And that's a strange term, or terms, the conservative and liberal, because it's based on the time frame at which it occurs, right? The founding fathers of the United States, they were liberals. The conservatives at that time were the Tories, those that were allied to the crown. Now you come to this point, and the people who are the conservatives are the ones who believe in free speech. They're the ones who believe in private property, free markets. Although I prefer open markets as opposed to free markets. There's a slight difference in the way you approach it, but open markets, where anyone is allowed to trade with anybody. Those principles are now the conservative position. Isn't that strange? Isn't that weird? That the conservative position is the one of freedom, and the liberal position is the one of shut up, sit down, we're in control, you will do as we say.